Hey guys, welcome to a weekly question video. If you like these question videos, give this video a like, leave me a comment, let me know what you think about this topic down below, and subscribe if you're not already. All of those things really do help out the channel. And if you want to get bonus content while helping support us do what we do here, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. So a link to our Patreon is down below. On this week's question video, I'm going to be answering the question of why don't we use non-physical punishments in our discipline system? Why don't we use something other than spanking? Because if you've listened to the podcast, it seems like all we use is spanking, and that is true. That is the only form of punishment or discipline that we use in our relationship, and that's because it works. Coda and I went through a period of time where we were really trying to find other things to help support the growth in our relationship and to help kind of facilitate the structures and the discipline within our relationship. And so we tried a lot of things. And quite frankly, nothing works like spanking works, at least not for us. There are other couples that I have talked to that have had success with incorporating other forms of punishment, of discipline, but for us that has just never really worked. So we tried things like writing lines in corner time, sitting on or kneeling on an uncomfortable surface. Things like that just felt punitive, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's punishment, it's supposed to be punitive, but there's a difference between punishment that grows and develops your relationship and punishment that is just punitive. And for me, the whole purpose of domestic discipline is to strengthen our bond, to grow our connection, and to create a better relationship at the end of the day. And punishments that create distance, that are very hands-off for the head of household, those don't create that connection and that bond to the relationship and to the process. Coda in particular really disliked things like writing lines because he felt very disconnected from the process, and he really wanted to be the facilitator of my discipline. And so spanking gives him the ability to facilitate that process and to be the one giving the discipline, not just assigning, not just overseeing, but really actively participating in the process of my discipline. And so that is one reason that we really stepped away from that. And that's because spanking works. And it works because it is tangible, it is immediate, it is something that really creates a system where there is a response. And the response is consistent, it's predictable, and it is effective. Like, I don't want to be spanked. I am going to do what I need to do to try to avoid discipline, to try to avoid earning corrections, to try to avoid punishments, because I don't want to go through the physical process of receiving a spanking. I can't say the same thing for corner time. I can't say the same thing for writing lines or having my bedtime adjusted. They're not things that I would enjoy, but they're not things that I would really consider being a deterrent for my decision making. I'm never going to take pause and be like, ooh, I shouldn't do this, or I'm going to have to write lines. That's never gone through my mind. But I have taken pause to say, I shouldn't do this because this may lead to a spanking later. That has happened. And beyond that, when Coda is actively participating in my discipline, he's a part of that process. And so when I'm being disciplined, I can kind of feel his energy and understand the level of disappointment, the level of disrespect, the level of disruption to our relationship that my behavior caused. And it creates a connection to how my behavior affects my relationship in a way that writing lines never did. I have felt that I have disappointed my head of household when I am being spanked. And so that connection to the motivation of not wanting to disappoint him, not wanting to disrespect him, not wanting to let him down, that has only happened in spanking. And beyond the desire to avoid punishment, as a taken in hand, as a wife, I have to get to the point where my desire to behave, my desire to follow our structures, my desire to follow our rules comes from a place of wanting my head of household, wanting my husband to be respected, to be honored, to be happy with me, to be pleased with my behavior. That is really where my motivation is shifting, and that's where the majority of my motivation lies now. In the beginning, there was a more thoughtful connection to not wanting to receive a spanking. And although that motivation still exists, I still don't want to receive discipline. The bigger motivation is that I don't want to be disruptive to our relationship. I don't want my behavior, my thought patterns, my attitudes to break down the connection that we have. I want to always behave in a way that facilitates connection and creates that lasting bond. And the only way that I've been able to learn to shift my motivation there is because of the connection that we have during a spanking, to where I do sense his disappointment. I do sense how displeased he is in my behavior. I do sense the disrespect that he feels. And that just doesn't come with these other forms of punishment. And so, is it wrong to incorporate things like corner time into your discipline routine? Is it wrong to have things like writing lines or even a written apology, which I've talked about a lot before? That's not something that is part of our routine. That's not something that's required anymore. It's not bad to incorporate those things into your discipline system, but they should never take the place of the spanking itself, because the spanking is when the head of household really has that tangible connection to the leadership, to the guidance of the taken in hand. There is this exchange that happens within the spanking, to where she can feel the level of disappointment. She can feel the level of disrespect that he feels. And it's not because he's taking it out on her. It's not that he's trying to make sure that she feels just that she feels physically what he felt emotionally from her. But there is a level of that. There is an exchange that happens to where, he wants to make sure that she is appropriately feeling the weight of her decisions, of her mistakes, of the things that she chose to do. And so there's this connection that happens. And then after spanking, when that reconciliation happens, when that, apology takes place and forgiveness is bestowed and connection happens, all of those things really do create a stronger bond within the relationship. Where before, when I was, I would write lines, I would show Coda, I got the lines done. He would look through it. He would still give a verbal reprimand. He would be like, you understand why now, you need to do whatever it was. And I would say, yes, sir. And he's like, okay, good. There wasn't this level of reconciliation that happened. It was more of you did this is the consequence. All right, don't do it again. Where in spanking, it really is this connection of, this was disruptive to our relationship. You did not fulfill your responsibilities. There's the lecture time, where Coda can tell me that he's disappointed in me. He can tell me that he felt disrespected by me, and those things will not be allowed to happen in our relationship. The spanking happens, which is a very tangible connection to that mistake, where, he is showing me through the spanking itself why that was wrong. And then afterwards, there is this reconciliation, there is this connection, there is this drive to want to do better that just doesn't come with other forms of discipline. Now, I think that sometimes people think of spanking in domestic discipline as being this like really catastrophic event, as something that is just really like that's the last resort. That's like when you have just gone completely beyond the boundaries. That's when a spanking happens. And that's not the way we have approached it in our relationship, because I feel like if you leave spanking to a last resort, if you allow your taken in hand to kind of push the boundaries, and it's only when she really starts to show a pattern of, pushing the boundaries, or she starts to show a pattern of bad attitude or bad behavior, you kind of let her get away with it a few times. And then when it's just evident that this behavior, this attitude is not going to go away, then you resort to spanking, because obviously, it's gotten to a point that you have to put a stop to it now. When you have that attitude, you're setting yourself up to fail. You're setting your taken in hand up to fail. You're setting your relationship up to be frustrating, because if you look at spanking as just the natural outcome of the behavior that she chooses on a day-to-day basis, when you use spanking as a, sole punishment within your domestic discipline, and you kind of resort to that more, it becomes just the natural response to what is going on. And so if your taken in hand has a bad attitude, even the first time, you can say, okay, the natural outcome of you speaking to me poorly is that you get a spanking. The natural outcome to you not fulfilling your responsibilities is you get a spanking. The natural outcome to you taking out your bad day on me, talking to me poorly, having an attitude, coming home in a grumpy mood, all of those things, if you just look at the natural outcome to those decisions as a spanking, she will start to learn how to shift her behavior. She will start to learn how to prioritize her time, because there is a choice to be made in every situation. Even if I have a bad attitude, even if I've had a really bad day, even if, things have gone completely awry, the moment that Coda walks in the door, I have a choice to make. I can either be happy to see him, I can tell him what happened throughout the day. It's not a pretending everything's great. It's not this like Stepford wife type of mentality where I just have to pretend like everything was great. I can tell him what happened throughout the day, but in a way that is not pointed, and in a way that I'm not allowing the frustrations and the situations that I've had to go through, I'm not allowing that to affect how I'm interacting with him. I can do that. Other women can do that. Other women have done that, and I have done that. I have made those shifts. I used to be the worst. I used to be the world's worst at, letting external frustration affect how I interacted with Coda. I would take out my frustrations on him, and in a very unhealthy way, and it was really detrimental to our relationship. And so that is one thing that he has definitely worked on me with, because it's not fair to him, it's not right, and it's not helping our relationship grow at the end of the day. So if you use spanking as the natural outcome to poor decisions, she will start to learn not to make poor decisions. A bad day is not a good excuse for a bad attitude, and being grumpy is not a good excuse to take things out on your head of household, to be argumentative, to, just be disruptive to your relationship. It's not a good reason. There really is never a good reason. I can think of maybe a handful of reasons, but they are few and far between exceptions. It is not something that should be happening on a regular basis. Even our hormonal cycles as women that is not an excuse to allow our behavior and our attitudes to be poor towards our head of household. And again, I'm not saying that you can't talk to your head of household. I'm not saying that you can't be in a down mood, but there's a difference between telling your head of household, like, all of these things happened today, they were really frustrating and I really had to work through it. And then there's a difference between that and taking those frustrations out on your head of household and just being like, I am in the worst mood and you just have to deal with it. That's never acceptable. And the natural outcome of that attitude is a spanking, at least in my relationship. And so I've learned how to not have those attitudes towards Coda. That is also why I've learned to ask for correction preemptively, because if I've had a really bad day and I can tell that I'm really struggling not to let that affect how I communicate and how I interact with Coda, I will go to him and I will say, I need a correction because I'm having a really hard time managing how I'm interacting with you because all this other stuff happened. And he will gladly give me a correction for that because he wants what's best for me. He wants what's best for our relationship. And in that instance, what is best is to go ahead and spank it out of me. And that there's nothing wrong with that, because I understand that the natural outcome to having a bad attitude is a spanking. I can go ahead and preemptively ask for that so that I can get the spanking that I need, because obviously my attitude is suffering, so I need that spanking. And so I can get that spanking that I need without it actually disrupting my relationship. And that's why being able to ask for correction, being able to recognize when I need correction is so important. And so that's what I would encourage you with, is if you are noticing that you are just lacking connection in your discipline system, and maybe discipline isn't necessarily being the most beneficial, really take a look at how you're approaching things and take a look at your attitude towards spanking. Do you need to shift it to where you look at spanking as just the natural outcome of not fulfilling the rules, responsibilities, and not having the right attitudes? Because if you look at it as just being the natural outcome, then you can kind of lean into that system. And again, your taken in hand will learn under that system. They will learn how to be in an appropriate behavior, learn how to have an appropriate attitude, and learn how to fulfill their responsibilities and prioritize their time better. All right, guys, I'm going to stop there. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it kind of answered why we don't necessarily talk about non-physical punishments very much on the podcast, because that's just not our experience, and it's not something that we found success in. But I'd love to hear your experience, so share it down below. Let me know what you think, and we will talk to you next time.